The cold metal floor beneath her feet seemed to pulse with every heartbeat. Her mind raced with thoughts too sharp and dark to bear the coldness of the room, matched only by the chill running through her veins. Alyssa Kaur stood before the holographic display, her husband's face frozen in the moment of his execution, a calculated decision made by the Empire, the same Empire he had once served so loyally, now so willingly betraying him. She had never seen him more vulnerable, his eyes wide with disbelief, yet in them she could still see the man she had loved, the man who had once stood beside her on countless battlefields. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms, as the memory of his final moments burned into her mind. They had taken him, had turned his name into a whisper of fear among the people. But to her, he had always been the man she had married, the man who had understood her better than anyone else. He was a soldier like her, ruthless and efficient, but always with honor, always with loyalty. He had died for nothing more than a lie, a carefully crafted story woven by those who had the power to twist the truth into whatever they wished. She had always trusted the Empire, but now she saw it for what it truly was, a beast that consumed its own. Alyssa turned away from the hologram, her eyes cold as her breath caught in her chest. She had known betrayal was a part of the galaxy's fabric, but this betrayal felt personal. This was a weapon wielded against her and her love, her mind spun with the possibilities of vengeance and the dark path she would have to walk to exact it. She had been taught since childhood that a general's duty was to command and protect her people. If her people had failed her, her empire had taken everything and given her nothing but ashes. She had watched the face of the man she loved disappear from the screen. And in that moment, something within her snapped. The rage that had been simmering deep inside her heart rolled to life, her emotions no longer a storm to be contained, but a fire ready to consume everything in its path. Her instincts as a soldier kicked in, and the strategy that had always guided her would now guide her to vengeance. The universe had been blind to the fire that had been kindled within her. She would show them all what happens when the most feared general in the galaxy has nothing left to lose, nothing but a burning hatred that would drive her to the farthest corners of the universe. She had spent years fighting for the Empire, its ideals, its order, but now those ideals were ashes, and she would burn the rest of the galaxy to the ground to ensure they knew the cost of betraying a woman like her. There would be no mercy, no retreat, no surrender. She would make them feel her wrath as she had never felt before. Her husband's death would not be a footnote in history. It would be a turning point, the beginning of the end for the Empire that had destroyed everything she had loved. And from the depths of that pain, a new war would rise, one led by a general who no longer cared for victory or honor, but only for the destruction of those who had betrayed her. Alyssa Kaur would burn the Empire to the ground, and everyone who stood in her way would pay the price. Alyssa Kaur had always known the art of war, but now she waged a different kind of battle, one shaped by rage and loss. The galaxy once seemed so vast, so full of endless possibilities, but now it felt small and suffocating. Every world she looked at seemed to remind her of her loss, every star a distant memory of what had been taken from her. Her forces moved with precision, her tactics were flawless, a mind, a machine of calculated destruction. But beneath that cold exterior burned a fire that none could understand. Alyssa had become a legend, her name whispered across the galaxy as a symbol of terror as she struck again and again at the heart of the Empire's strength. Her crew followed her. Without question, they had been shaped by war like her, and they understood the meaning of vengeance. They were not soldiers, they were instruments of destruction, and they had no other purpose than to carry out her. Every mission they took part in was a message sent across the stars. No one was safe from the wrath of Alyssa Kaur, not even the Empire's most powerful fleets. Her first target was a convoy of supply ships transporting vital resources to the Imperial strongholds along the rim. She knew the Empire would never expect an assault this far from the heart of their power, and so she attacked without hesitation. Her ships emerged from the black void of space like predators, closing in on their prey in the blink of an eye. The convoy was engulfed in chaos. The explosions lit up the void, and the cold emptiness of space became a canvas for destruction. Her crew moved with brutal efficiency, No mercy was shown. They took what they needed and left nothing behind. The debris of the convoy became a symbol of what was to come. Alyssa's reputation spread like wildfire throughout the galaxy, the Empire's once untouchable stronghold, now trembling in fear of the woman who had become their nightmare. Every military commander, every officer who heard her name grew paranoid for fear of when and where she would strike next. No fleet was safe, no planet secure. They had taken her husband, and she had taken their peace. The shockwaves of her attacks rippled through the Empire's command structure, causing fractures among those who once held power. Her vengeance was not just a personal affair, it had become a war of attrition, one that would tear at the very fabric of the Empire she had once served. She wasn't fighting just to hurt them, she was fighting to break them, to show the galaxy that no empire, no matter how powerful, was immune to the wrath of a woman who had lost everything. The pain of her loss had become a weapon more potent than any fleet she had ever commanded. Her every move was a message to the Empire, a promise that they would never find rest until they paid the price for the life they had taken from her. Alyssa knew the battles would get harder, the enemies would get stronger, the risks would grow greater. But none of that mattered anymore. For the first time in her life, she fought not for the cause of others, not for honor, not for duty, but for herself, for the promise she had made to her husband's memory. The destruction she wrought was a dark form of justice, and with each victory, she moved closer to the heart of the Empire, closer to the moment when she would face those who had condemned him to die and make them pay for what they had done. Alyssa had become more than just a name now. She was a phantom haunting the Empire, a specter in the shadows, leaving chaos in her wake. Every strike more calculated than the last, every move a lesson in terror. Her reputation had grown until it felt as though her presence was everywhere. No matter where the Empire's forces went, they feared the possibility of her arrival. She had learned the art of disappearing into the dark corners of the galaxy, never staying in one place long enough for them to catch her trail. Her fleet moved like shadows, flitting through star systems, leaving no evidence of their existence, save for the wreckage left behind. Every battle had its purpose, but for Alyssa, it was more than a mission. It was a message. With every target she struck, she grew closer to the heart of the Empire. She knew that the real battle lay ahead. It wasn't just the fleets or the planets. It was the men who had orchestrated her husband's death, the ones who believed they were untouchable. They were her true prey, and she would make them bleed for their arrogance. Her methods were precise, her tactics brutal. She understood that a fractured enemy was a vulnerable one, so she worked from the inside out, dismantling their supply chains, causing distrust and confusion among the ranks of the Empire's officers. Fractures in their command were becoming more evident, and with each whispered report of her strikes, the fear in their hearts grew palpable. They knew she was coming, but they didn't know when or where she would strike next. Alyssa's crew followed her lead without question. Their loyalty had been earned not through words, but through the certainty of her command. They had witnessed firsthand the power of her strategy. Her ruthlessness was not just a tool, it was an extension of her. Well, they trusted her in a way that even the most seasoned generals could not claim. Alyssa had begun to understand the mind of the Empire better than she ever had before. She knew their strategies, she knew their weaknesses, and now she was exploiting them with an efficiency that made her unstoppable. Yet there was a part of her that still burned with the desire for something more than just victory. She craved the moment when she could finally stand before those responsible for her husband's death, the men who had executed him, and tear their empire apart with her own hands. That moment would come soon. She could feel it in the air. The tension that had been building was reaching its peak. She began to set her sights on the inner circle of the Empire, the men who ran the war from the shadows, the ones who had whispered lies to turn the galaxy against her husband, the ones who had sentenced him to die without remorse, without reason. They would not escape the reckoning. She would bring to them. Alyssa's mind worked like a machine, each move more complex than the last. She could no longer afford to strike blindly. She needed to know their plans. She needed their weaknesses to be laid bare before her, before she could destroy them. And so she turned to espionage, infiltrating Imperial strongholds and gathering intelligence. As she went, her crew became masters of subterfuge, slipping through the cracks of the Empire's defenses. They moved unnoticed, even as they were leaving behind a trail of terror. Every report, every piece of information was a small victory in her war against them. The Empire thought they were safe. They thought they had closed the net around her. But they didn't understand that Alyssa had already seen through their plans before they even made them. She was no longer just a soldier, she was their nightmare. She was the ghost in their system waiting for the right moment to strike when the time came. They would realize too late that there was nowhere to hide. Alyssa's war against the Empire had escalated into something more than she ever anticipated. It was no longer just about vengeance. It was about destruction on a scale she hadn't imagined possible. The galaxy trembled with each of her strikes, and the Empire's high command began to feel the pressure mounting. But in the midst of her campaign, an unexpected ally emerged. Captain Varric had been one of the Empire's rising stars, a young officer known for his brilliance and his ruthlessness, a man whose ambition was as vast as the Empire itself. But Varric had grown disillusioned with the Emperor's rule, the cruelty, the corruption, the endless war that had drained the life from the galaxy. He had seen the cracks in the system, and now he sought to bring it all crashing down. Varric reached out to Alyssa in secret, offering information that could cripple the Empire's war efforts, a treasure trove of intelligence that could turn the tide in her favor. It was an offer she couldn't refuse, and despite her wariness, she knew that Varric had something she needed. But as the days passed, and she worked closely with him, a sense of unease began to settle in the way he spoke of the Empire was almost too idealistic, as if he was not just seeking its downfall, but planning to replace it with something new. His eagerness to destroy the Emperor's rules seemed to come from a place of pure ambition. And though his motives aligned with hers for now, Alyssa couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She trusted no one fully anymore, not even those who helped her. She had learned that the hard way, but she played along for now, using him as a tool to achieve her own goals. She began to rely on the intelligence he provided, launching more targeted attacks against key Imperial assets. With each victory, she felt closer to the ultimate confrontation. But as the stakes grew higher, so did the tension between them. Varric had a way of pushing her boundaries, testing her patience with his constant talk of revolution and new ideals. But Alyssa had no interest in revolutions. She wasn't fighting for the future of the galaxy, she was fighting for revenge. And if Varric's vision of the future didn't align with hers, then so be it. But his obsession with overthrowing the Empire's leaders began to feel like something more than just shared hatred. Alyssa had always operated in the shadows. Her war was silent, her vengeance personal. But Varric's schemes were grandiose. He spoke of sweeping changes, of a new order where the Empire's power structures would be dismantled and replaced for something more, just something that would end the oppression. But Alyssa saw only one target: the Emperor and the men who had condemned her husband. She wanted to tear it all down brick by brick and leave nothing but ashes behind. She didn't care about the future, she only cared about the past and the debts owed to her. But Varric's ideas began to gnaw at her. He was playing a dangerous game, and as the days went by, his actions began to feel less like an alliance and more like manipulation. The more she relied on him, the more she wondered if he had been using her all along to achieve his own ends. And if she wasn't careful, he might just become the next person she had to destroy. When she needed him most, would he be a true ally or another betrayer waiting to stab her in the back? The tension between them built to a breaking point. But Alyssa was no fool. She would not allow herself to be blind again. She would have to confront Varric and figure out once and for all whose side he was really on. And when the time came, she would make sure that he understood the consequences of crossing her. No one betrayed her, not even those who claimed to share her goals. Alyssa's patience had worn thin. The time for subtlety had passed. It was no longer enough to strike from the shadows. She needed to make a statement, a declaration that would echo through the Empire's ranks and shake them to their very core. She had gathered enough intelligence from Varric's sources to strike at the heart of one of the Empire's most strategic strongholds, an orbital station that housed a fleet capable of turning the tide in the war. It was a fortress well protected by layers of security and fleets of soldiers. But Alyssa knew no fortress was invulnerable, not when you had the will to tear it down with your own hands. She had spent days studying the station's defenses, learning every weakness, every blind spot in their surveillance networks. And when the moment arrived, her fleet moved like a vengeful storm. The attack came swift and brutal. Her forces cut through the void with unrelenting fury. The Empire's defenses scrambled to respond, but they were too slow, too disorganized, underestimating the woman who had already shattered their illusions of invincibility. The battle was chaos, a symphony of explosions and fire, as Alyssa's ships descended upon the station with terrifying precision. She had no mercy in her heart. Every order was aimed at destroying their ability to fight back, to break them before they could even organize a defense. Her fleet was a weapon of destruction, and they tore through the station's hull like a blade through flesh. They were methodical. Their goal wasn't just to destroy it, was to send a message to the galaxy that the Empire was not untouchable, that no one was safe from Alyssa Corps' wrath. The station's command center fell first. Within moments, it was reduced to rubble, and with it went the heart of their defense. The rest of the station was a flurry of chaos as Alyssa's forces moved with brutal efficiency, dismantling everything in their path. The explosions were deafening, and the fires consumed the once proud symbol of the Empire's might. One by one, the station's systems went dark, and the remaining Imperial officers on board found themselves trapped in a collapsing nightmare. There was no escape for them, no reinforcements, no hope. Alyssa watched it all unfold from her command ship, her gaze cold and unwavering. The power of the Empire was fading before her eyes, and she reveled in it. With every explosion, she could feel the grip of their control loosening. She had seen the face of the Empire at its peak, and now she saw it at its breaking point. Her victory was complete. But it was not just about the destruction, it was the message she had sent. The galaxy would know what she had done, and they would know that the woman who had once served the Empire was the one who had brought it to its knees. The battle had been brutal, but it had been necessary for Alyssa's vengeance to be realized. She knew it wasn't enough to simply strike at their ships. She had to cripple their morale. She had to make them fear her more than they feared their Emperor. And that fear would spread like wildfire throughout their ranks. There was no turning back now. The path she had chosen was clear. She would not stop until every man responsible for her husband's death paid the price, until the Empire was no more, until the galaxy knew her name, not as a soldier, but as a force of nature, unstoppable and unforgiving. Alyssa had always known that her vengeance would lead her to this moment. The time had come to confront the true masters of the Empire, the ones who had pulled the strings from the shadows, the ones who had sentenced her husband to death and branded him a traitor. The Emperor was the puppet master of it all, but it wasn't just him. It was the men and women around him, the ones who had plotted his death and turned the gears of power to ensure it went unnoticed. Alyssa's thirst for vengeance had driven her this far, but now she understood that to truly destroy the Empire, she would need to strike at its heart, to expose the rot within and tear it apart from the inside. She had learned from Varric's intelligence that the Emperor's inner circle was filled with corruption and deceit. The power structures that held the galaxy together were fragile. Their loyalty to the Emperor was a facade built on fear and greed. They were no different from the rest of the Empire. They were all complicit in her husband's death, and Alyssa would make them pay. She had already devastated their military forces. She had already broken their morale. But now it was time to destroy their foundations from within, to expose their secrets and bring them to their knees. She couldn't do it alone. Not anymore. Varric had proven useful, but his ambition had begun to show cracks. She could no longer trust him fully, but she had no choice. She needed him to help her navigate the depths of the Empire's heart if she was to have any chance of reaching the Emperor. But as they drew closer to the capital and the heart of imperial power, the tension between them grew sharper. The closer they got to their goal, the more dangerous the game became. Alyssa began to question whether Varric was still truly on her side, or if he had other plans. He had spoken of overthrowing the Emperor. But what did that mean for Alyssa? What would happen once the Emperor was gone? Would he want to replace him and take control for himself? Alyssa knew better than to trust anyone fully, and the thought of another betrayal made her skin crawl. But she needed him for now. She had to keep her focus. Her mission was clear. The Emperor had to fall, and those who had made the decision to take her husband's life would not escape the consequences. Alyssa's plan was a delicate one. She had to infiltrate the heart of imperial power. Without being detected, she would have to blend in with the very forces she had spent her life fighting against. But she was no stranger to deception. She had worn the mask of loyalty long enough to understand how to play the game. It would not be easy, but she knew it was the only way to get close enough to strike. Her hatred burned hotter with each passing moment as she approached the heart of the Empire. But there was no turning back now. She would burn it all to the ground and make them watch as the flames consumed everything they had built. The Emperor would pay for his treachery, and the Empire would fall at her feet. Alyssa felt the weight of her choices, the weight of the war she had started and the people she had lost. But there was no room for doubt, no room for hesitation, only the certainty that her vengeance was the only thing that mattered now. She would tear down the Empire, and nothing would stand in her way, not Varric, not the Emperor, not anyone. The galaxy would know her name, and they would know the price of betrayal. Alyssa's fleet had arrived at the capital, and the tension was palpable. Every member of her crew knew that this was the moment, the one that would decide everything they had fought for. All the pain, all the destruction had led them to this one final strike, and they could feel it in the air, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. But for Alyssa, there was no hesitation, no fear. Her mind was sharp, her purpose clear. As they entered the heart of the Empire's territory, her eyes remained fixed on the prize. The Emperor was close, and so were the men who had helped to execute her husband, the men who had betrayed her. She would not let them escape the wrath she had promised them for years. She had become more than just a general, more than a woman who had once served the Empire. She was the reckoning, and the Empire would pay for every atrocity they had committed. Her fleet moved silently through the darkness of space, moving closer to the capital planet, like a shadow growing larger. The Empire had no idea what was coming. They had grown arrogant in their power, believing themselves untouchable, believing they were beyond retribution. They were wrong. As they entered the atmosphere of the capital world, Alyssa felt the weight of her past decisions, the weight of the death of her husband, the weight of every life she had taken. But she could not falter now. The time for doubt was long past. The time for mercy had died with her husband. This was not about justice anymore, it was about vengeance. And the universe would feel it. Alyssa's fleet began to strike from the skies, targeting key military and governmental buildings with precision, each strike an extension of her anger, each explosion a message. The Emperor would feel her fury. Before he saw her face, she could already feel the chaos rising in the capital. The streets were filled with screams, the once proud city now under siege, the air filled with smoke and the fire of war. Alyssa moved with methodical precision, her mind calculating every step, every moment she was on the ground. Now moving among the chaos, her eyes locked on the Imperial Palace in the distance. That was where the Emperor and his inner circle were hiding, waiting for the storm to pass. But it would never pass, not until she had her reckoning. She had no more allies in the Empire, just enemies who had once believed they were untouchable. But now they were vulnerable. Alyssa and her team infiltrated the palace with ease. The corridors were lined with Imperial guards, but they were no match for her, the woman who had destroyed fleets, who had toppled strongholds and burned cities to the ground. They were just another obstacle to be crushed in her pursuit of vengeance. As they moved closer to the throne room, Alyssa could feel the pulse of the Empire vibrating in her bones. This was at the endgame, the moment she would finally confront the Emperor and his council, the ones who had sentenced her husband to death and turned her world into ashes. And when she stood before them, she would not hesitate, she would show no mercy. This would be their final reckoning. And they would understand what it meant to betray her, to betray a woman who had nothing left, to lose her anger, her pain, her fury, would be the instrument of their destruction. And when it was over, they would know she had been the one to bring them to their knees. And the galaxy would forever remember the day the Empire fell at the hands of Alyssa Kaur. Alyssa reached the throne room doors, her heart pounding with a mixture of anger and anticipation. The final moment had come, the moment she would face the Emperor, the man who had orchestrated her husband's death, the man who had stolen everything from her. The heavy doors swung open, and Alyssa stepped into the grand hall, the air thick with the stench of power and arrogance. The Emperor sat upon his throne, surrounded by his closest advisors. They all turned to face her, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had not expected her to make it this far. They had believed her just another soldier, another casualty of their games. But she had proven them wrong. And now they would pay for their hubris. She walked forward slowly, her footsteps echoing in the silent room, each step resonating with the weight of all the pain and loss she had endured. The Emperor rose from his throne, his eyes cold and calculating. He had the look of a man who believed himself invincible. But Alyssa could see the fear behind his eyes, the fear of someone who had underestimated the woman standing before him. "You dare to come here?" he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "This is my empire, your vengeance," means nothing. Alyssa didn't flinch at his words. She had long since stopped caring about the empty threats of men like him. "You are wrong," she said, her voice low and filled with the fury that had been growing inside her for years. "You will pay for what you did to him. You will pay for what you did to me." She raised her weapon, the blade gleaming in the dim light. The Emperor's eyes flickered with uncertainty for a brief moment before he masked it with a smug grin. "You think you can destroy me," he said. "You think you can destroy everything I built. I have the power of the galaxy at my fingertips. You are nothing but a vengeful woman who has lost her way." Alyssa's grip on her blade tightened. "You are nothing but a coward," she said. "The galaxy sees you as a god. But you are just a man, a broken man who hides behind power and fear. You took my husband's life and thought you could get away with it. But you are wrong. You will never be untouchable again." The Emperor's face twisted with rage. "You think you can kill me and change the galaxy," he spat. "You think you can bring down everything I have built. My empire is eternal." Alyssa didn't waste a moment. She lunged forward, her blades slicing through the air with deadly precision. The Emperor barely had time to react, but it was too late. Alyssa's blade struck true. It cleaved through the air and struck him down. The sound of his body hitting the cold floor echoed through the hall. The room fell silent as the Emperor's advisors looked on in shock. Some cowered, others stood frozen in fear. The leader who had once seemed so untouchable now lay dead on the cold stone floor at Alyssa's feet. The victory was hers, but it felt hollow for a moment. The anger that had burned inside her for so long began to fade, leaving only the emptiness of what had come before. The Emperor was dead, but the galaxy still lay in ruins. Her husband was still gone, and the weight of her actions pressed down on her shoulders. As she stood over the Emperor's body, she realized that vengeance had come at a cost. The price of her soul was steep. And as she looked down at the lifeless body of the man who had caused so much pain, she wondered what was left for her now. She had achieved her revenge, but she had lost herself in the process. The galaxy would now know her name, but what would it mean to them? When the ashes of the Empire settled, what would she be? When the war was over, the woman who had burned it all down, or the woman who had nothing left to rebuild? The silence in the throne room was deafening. The body of the Emperor lay sprawled on the cold stone floor, his blood staining the imperial carpet. The once proud symbol of the Empire, now desecrated by the woman who had toppled it all. Alyssa stood over him, the blade still gripped tightly in her hand. But she felt no joy, no sense of accomplishment, just an overwhelming emptiness. The roar of battle, the cries of those she had destroyed echoed in her mind as she looked down at the man who had stolen her future and torn apart her world. She had promised herself that the death of the Emperor would bring her peace, but the weight of it was suffocating. She had done what she came to do, but she felt no closure, only the cold, bitter taste of vengeance, fulfilled yet somehow unfulfilling. The death of the Emperor had not healed the wound that ran deep inside her. It had not brought back the man she loved. It had not filled the void in her heart that seemed to stretch on forever. She had avenged him, yes, but at what cost? The Empire was gone, shattered beyond repair. But that didn't mean the galaxy was any better off. It was a galaxy in ruins, its foundations crumbling, and its future uncertain. Alyssa had destroyed the Empire, but she had also destroyed a part of herself in the process. Her people were scattered, her allies were gone, and there was no one left to follow her, no one left to trust. She had become a symbol of vengeance. But was that all? She was now the destroyer of worlds, the woman who had burned everything down. Or was there more to her than that she had to face the reality that her journey didn't end with the fall of the Empire? It was only the beginning. The galaxy still needed to be rebuilt. But who would lead it? Who would rebuild the shattered pieces of a broken world? And would they even want someone like her to do it? The thought of power sickened her. The idea of ruling was foreign to her. But in the void left by the Empire's collapse, someone had to take the reins, someone had to step up to guide the galaxy out of the ashes. And the question remained, was she the one to do it? Her mind drifted back to the moment she had stood beside her husband, the moment they had fought together against the oppressive rule of the Empire. Back then she had believed in something. She had believed in the cause, the hope that the galaxy could be better. But now, in the wake of all that destruction, she wasn't sure what she believed in anymore. She was no longer the soldier who fought for a higher cause. She was a woman consumed by vengeance, a woman who had destroyed everything to get what she wanted. And now she was left to pick up the pieces of a galaxy she no longer understood. Alyssa turned away from the Emperor's body and walked toward the shattered windows of the throne room. The galaxy stretched out before her, the stars glittering in the distance. It was beautiful and broken all at once, a reflection of the woman she had become, a woman who had lost her way and was now left to find a new path. But she knew one thing for certain: the Empire was gone, and the galaxy had been irrevocably changed. It was up to her to decide what came next, whether she would rebuild or let the ashes settle and let the future decide for itself. But in the end, it was her choice, and for the first time in years, Alyssa felt a flicker of hope, a chance for redemption, not just for the galaxy, but for herself.